In the pale breath of dawn that drifted across the English countryside in the year 1814, there lived a woman whom society had already buried while she still drew breath. She was 40 years of age, the overlooked daughter of a fading baronetcy, and in the arithmetic of the Regency world, she had long ago been counted as a loss. The world had given her a name that was never spoken aloud in polite company, yet lived behind every lifted fan and lowered whisper: Spinster. Her family's estate stood like a ghost of its former self, walls stained by damp neglect, windows clouded by time and gardens reclaimed by nettles and thorns. Once, it had been a place of laughter, of hosted dinners and candlelit music, but that life belonged to another century, and perhaps another woman entirely. Now it existed in a perpetual hush, broken only by the sound of floorboards complaining beneath careful steps and the rustle of unpaid bills hidden in locked drawers. She moved through its corridors with quiet grace, a grace learned not from praise but from survival. Her father, a baronet in title but barely so in fortune, no longer looked at her as a daughter. He looked at her as an answer to a problem he could not solve alone. The debts mounted like winter fog, thick and unrelenting, and the estate trembled on the verge of collapse. There were no younger daughters to barter, no sons strong enough to inherit rescue. There was only her, with her fading youth and untapped dignity, now being offered to a man twice blessed with gold and twice burdened by years. The earl who had come forward was wealthy, widowed, and approaching his 70th year, a man more in search of obedience than companionship. He did not speak of affection when the agreement was discussed, only of stability, duty, and appearances. He looked at her not as a woman but as a solution, a convenient figure to stand beside him, to manage his household and to sit silently at his side. In the eyes of her family this was generosity. In the eyes of society it was mercy. In her own heart, it was a burial with breath still inside her chest. The conversations unfolded in hushed tones behind closed oak doors, as if her life were a secret too indelicate to announce. She was never invited to speak. She was never asked to consent. Her future was moved across polished tables like a ledger balanced at last. And yet, outwardly she remained calm, her voice soft, her posture controlled, as though this fate were something she had rehearsed since girlhood. In truth, she had done exactly that, though not in obedience, but in preparation for disappointment. In the salons of neighboring estates, laughter had grown sharper where she was concerned. She had once been admired for her gentleness, her thoughtful eyes, her quiet intellect. Now she was treated as a curiosity, an ornament of pity, a reminder of what became of women who lingered too long without claim. Invitations arrived late or not at all. Conversations ceased when she entered a room. Even kindness, when extended, felt like a wound dressed in velvet, soft to the touch and cruel in its meaning. It was not loneliness that frightened her most, though she felt it nightly in the hollow stillness of her chambers. It was the slow erosion of self, the way years of dismissal had attempted to convince her that she was, indeed, a thing of lesser worth. She had fought that poison quietly, educating herself in borrowed books, walking alone through forgotten lanes, finding purpose in small acts of grace that no one ever saw. She had learned to exist without being witnessed, and in that skill she had become dangerously strong. For weeks, the date of the arrangement hovered like a gathering storm. The dress was chosen for her, a dull respectable shade that spoke neither of hope nor rebellion. The household staff whispered as they passed her in the halls, a mixture of sympathy and relief that it was not their fate to fulfill. Her father began to speak again of repairs that could be made, lands that might be recovered, as though her life had already been converted into coin. Then, on the evening before the formal announcement, a silence settled within her that felt different from all the others. It was not the silence of resignation, nor of fear, nor of sadness. It was the silence of awakening. She sat alone by the narrow window of her bedroom, watching moonlight settle over the broken hedges and cracked stone path, and for the first time in many years she imagined not endurance but escape. She did not imagine romance. She did not imagine rescue. She imagined only the simple dignity of choosing her own steps, even if they led nowhere, even if they ended in ruin. Better a ruin chosen than a prison adorned with silk. Her hands trembled as she folded a small number of garments into a plain traveling bag. Not the finest fabrics, not the jewels long locked away, but practical cloth and modest shoes, tools for a journey made without ceremony. No one heard her move through the sleeping house. Even the portraits along the corridors seemed to avert their eyes, trapped in their own frozen histories of duty and submission. The door yielded with a tired groan, as though the house itself understood what her heart could no longer ignore. Outside, the air was cold and silvered by mist, carrying the scent of earth and wet iron. She stepped onto the gravel path, the sound too loud in her ears, and for a fleeting, terrible moment, doubt reached for her. Behind her lay obligation, safety, and a life already written. Before her lay uncertainty, scandal, and solitude. Yet her feet moved forward, drawn not by hope, but by the necessity of breath. Then through the fog came the soft, deliberate sound of hooves. She froze. At the far edge of the drive, where the old wrought iron gate rusted under the weight of years, a horse stood waiting, its rider obscured by the pale drifting mist. The animal shifted impatiently, metal fittings whispering faintly against the morning hush. The rider did not approach. He waited. Her heart slowed, not in fear, but in recognition of something undefined and long buried. Whoever waited there had not come by accident. Whoever waited knew more than they should. And in that suspended moment between retreat and revelation, she realized that her escape had never truly been solitary at all. The rider lifted himself from the saddle with slow, deliberate control, and the fog revealed a figure whose presence altered the air around him. He was dressed in dark, travel-worn military coat, the cut unmistakably fine, the posture shaped by years of command and restraint. The horse stilled at once, as though trained not only by rein but by will, and the man's boots touched the gravel with a silence that felt practiced. He removed his hat, and the woman saw the face she had not permitted herself to imagine for years, because to imagine him had always been to suffer. He was the Duke of Harland, a name that moved through England like a whispered current, known in Parliament, in salons, on battlefields, and in those rare conversations where legend replaced truth. He had been a commander of men during the long grinding wars against Napoleon, had led charges that history would later reduce to tidy paragraphs, and carried in his eyes the distant shadows of places where the air had smelled of smoke, blood, and wet earth. Where others wore their titles like ornaments, he bore his like armor, heavy, disciplined, and never removed. He did not bow deeply, nor offer false surprise at finding her there. He inclined his head with respectful composure, as though they stood not at the edge of scandal, but in the quiet corner of a well-mannered drawing-room. Her name trembled on his lips without sound, and he held it back as if speaking it aloud would do her injury. Instead, his voice, when it came, was low and carefully arranged. He said only that the hour was unforgiving and that he feared she might find the road less kind than she deserved. She did not ask how he knew of her plan because the question felt as fragile as glass. The truth of it hovered between them. A duke did not appear by accident at the gate of a crumbling estate at dawn. He stood too straight for coincidence, too steady for chance. His gaze carried not wintry curiosity, but a patient concern that unsettled her more deeply than alarm ever could. He had come not to intercept, but to witness. For years he had watched her from distances shaped by propriety. In candlelit halls, he had noted the way she listened rather than spoke, the manner in which she faded from attention as younger, brighter figures claimed the rooms. He had seen the slow retreat of her light, the way her smile adapted itself to survival. Yet even then, when she had been surrounded by cruelty softened by lace, he had observed something in her that did not bend, a quiet intelligence, a steadiness that seemed immune to noise and fashion. He remembered the night he first understood what her silence meant. a winter gathering where she stood by a frost-laced window while laughter rose behind her, and she did not attempt to join it. The glass had reflected a woman who could have withered or hardened, and instead had chosen endurance without bitterness. It was then that the dangerous, unspoken thing took root in him, though he had trained his heart to remain as disciplined as a regiment. He was a duke, and she was the daughter of a baronet whose fortunes were already fraying. Even affection would have been considered a miscalculation, and he had built his life upon avoiding those. The war had given him distance, and in distance he had given himself the mercy of forgetting. Yet he had not forgotten. Across seas and smoke-filled fields, he had measured survival not by breath alone, but by the thought that somewhere in England there lived a woman who deserved to be seen more gently than the world allowed. Letters had brought him rumors of her fading prospects, of her father's debt, of proposals that smelled more of finance than fate. He had never intervened, because intervention would have shattered what little dignity remained to her. Until now. When word reached him, carried by chance and conversation, that she was to be bound to a man old enough to remember wars of other generations, something in him shifted beyond command. It was not rage. It was not jealousy. It was clarity, cold and decisive. The kind that had sent men forward under cannon fire and brought them back alive. He had not come to steal her away. He had come to ensure that if she fled, she would not be hunted, and if she stayed, she would not be coerced. The morning mist thickened as they stood facing one another, and the silence between them grew not awkward, but intimate, shaped by things too dangerous to speak. She saw the lines at the corner of his eyes, etched by years of responsibility, not indulgence. She saw in him not glittering romance, but restraint so carefully forged that it could split at a single touch. At last he extended neither hand nor command. He made no offer of wings or escape. He spoke one sentence only, and it was offered like a truth rather than a temptation. He told her that if she walked into the fog, she would not be alone on the road. He told her that if she chose to return to the house, he would ride away and never speak of this hour to another living soul. He told her that he had no right to her fate, but he could not allow her to be treated as merchandise. The very absence of pressure startled her more than any passionate declaration might have done. She had expected persuasion or pity. Instead, she was offered respect in its purest and rarest form, the dignity of choice. The world had always moved her like a piece upon a board, and here stood a man of towering rank who refused to touch the board at all. Her pulse betrayed her control, but she kept her voice steady. She asked him what he would do if she took a step toward him. He did not hesitate. He said he would step aside and let her pass, because her freedom was not his property. Something inside her loosened at that, painfully, beautifully. The fog shifted once more, and the air grew lighter, as if even the morning held its breath. She looked back once at the house, at the darkened windows that had contained her so long. Then she looked at the man before her, who offered nothing and yet gave everything that mattered. She lifted her bag, and took a single step forward. The moment did not explode into scandal or speech. It settled, quiet and irrevocable, like the turning of a key in a lock long rusted shut. And though neither of them yet spoke the word that trembled between them, they both understood that something sacred and dangerous had begun its first, fragile breath. The carriage moved through the thinning mist with quiet purpose, its wheels whispering along the dampened road, as though even the earth understood the delicacy of their flight. He did not sit immediately beside her, but opposite, giving her space so deliberate it felt like a silent oath. The horses maintained a steady pace, guided more by discipline than urgency, and the morning light began to thread itself through the fog, revealing fields that had for years seemed unreachable to her spirit. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, feeling the tremor within them, unwilling to let it escape into the air between them. The Duke watched her not with hunger nor triumph, but with a steady attentiveness that suggested he had long memorized the quiet movements of her existence. He did not fill the silence with platitudes, for he knew she had lived too long on words that meant nothing. Instead, he allowed the quiet to exist as a shared territory, no longer empty, no longer cold. By midday, rumors had already begun their restless work. A servant had noticed the open door. A neighbor had observed the gate disturbed. Absence, in places of decay, was more noticeable than presence. Her father discovered the emptiness in her chamber and responded not with grief, but calculations, pacing among dusted furniture as though searching for a misplaced coin. He understood at once what her disappearance would mean to him, and understanding hardened into fury without passing through sorrow. The Earl, denied his bargain, felt insult rather than loss. His pride, accustomed to purchase and command, recoiled at the thought that a woman so long dismissed had slipped beyond his arrangement. He spoke of disgrace, of consequences, of reputation, not because he loved honor but because he loved control. In him, age had not softened vanity, it had only made it more brittle and dangerous. The Duke knew these reactions would come, and in knowing it, he did not waver. War had taught him that consequences were inevitable, and courage lay not in avoiding them, but in meeting them unaltered in the eye. As the day unfolded, he began to speak, not of promises but of truths. He told her that England was not kind to women who chose their own paths. He told her that scandal would follow them like a long shadow. He told her that he did not intend to shield her with lies, but with loyalty. She listened, and for the first time in decades she felt neither pitted nor positioned. She felt addressed. She told him that she had no fantasies of safety, no expectations of triumph. She told him that pain was an old companion and disgrace a familiar language. Her only fear, she confessed, was returning to the silence that had erased her. He absorbed her words with the gravity of a man accustomed to carrying both victory and loss without distinction. They did not stop at inns crowded with curious eyes, nor at roads alive with gossip. Instead, they traveled with careful direction toward the outskirts of a great estate that belonged, in truth, to him. Not to entrap her, but to ensure she could choose the next breath without pursuit. He arranged for modest quarters, quiet, dignified, free of servants inclined toward rumor. He did not attempt to enter the space once she had crossed its threshold, offering privacy not as distance but as respect. That evening, news reached the larger circles of the Ton. It spread across tea tables, passed through ballrooms, whispered down marbled staircases. The story altered as it traveled, becoming more dramatic with each telling. Some said she had been stolen. Some said she had bewitched him. Some said the Duke had lost his reason. None said the truth, which was that a woman had chosen herself, and a powerful man had refused to deny her that dignity. When the great gathering was held weeks later, there was no avoiding the reckoning. The Duke appeared not in defiance but in composure, dressed not for battle but for clarity. She stood beside him, not adorned extravagantly but simply, her presence carrying a calm that silenced speculation more effectively than argument ever could. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize. He simply stated, before those who had measured lives like currency, that he intended to make her his wife. The room seemed to forget its breath. No one laughed. No one dared. They had mocked her in silence for years, and now silence had turned against them. They saw before them not a fallen spinster, but a woman chosen by a man whose command carried weight not because of force, but because of integrity. The air shifted, not in celebration but in reckoning, as though the rules of inheritance and tradition had been forced to witness themselves. Her father did not attend. The Earl did not appear. Their absence mattered less than it should have, for what had once been authority now felt like echo. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, astonishing calm. She was not being elevated. She was being seen. There was no adornment in the recognition, only truth. That night, as they stood alone at the edge of the estate grounds, she asked him why he had risked everything. He answered without poetry. He said that battlefields had taught him that a life made smaller by fear was already half lost. He said that watching her vanish slowly from the world while possessing everything that mattered had been a cruelty he could no longer accept. He did not call it love. He called it recognition. She understood that word. She had lived her life unnoticed yet never empty. She had carried kindness without witnesses, intelligence without applause, strength without permission. To be recognized was not rescue. It was awakening. She felt no sudden transformation, no softening of scars. She felt steady, present, undeniable. When she returned to her chamber that evening, she did not close the door with dread. She looked out upon the darkened grounds and saw not an ending but a threshold. Beyond the silence of the trees lay a world that would not yield easily, a society that would resist change and punish defiance. Yet within her rested a quiet certainty that had survived mockery, neglect, and years of erasure. She knew this was not the conclusion of their story. It was the beginning of the life they would have to fight for.